Welcome to this edition of Inside Pasco, a program that's all about how we get things done across the organization. Now more than ever, as we move our organization from good to great, it's important that we share what we are doing to achieve our levels of service, how we focus on achieving our business plans and aligning them to the strategic plan, and how we measure, report, and improve our performance. This is an opportunity to learn about the actions and activities senior leaders are using right now to make these things happen. We'll talk about what's working well, the things you might want to implement yourself, and we'll also talk about where struggles are popping up that one of you might have a solution for. This is another way that we are working together to get closer to Premier. Joining me today is Erik Breitenbach, Assistant County Administrator for Internal Services. Erik, welcome.
Thank you.
So as an organization, we're on the sterling journey to go from good to great. So tell us what that looks like in your branch.
Well, it takes many different forms in internal services. Part of our charge is to find ways to continuously improve to make the organization better. And I'll give a couple of examples. Probably the heaviest area that it's the sterling journey is in our branches, in our budget office. We've got many examiners in there. A large preponderance of the organizational sterling implementation team is centered in the budget office, but it also trickles into some of the other departments in the branch, from making improvements to get from good to great. Things like fleet, implementing an online reservation system for maintenance. That's a small improvement going to get towards great. All the way to our fiscal department and ERP team, not too long ago implementing an ability to ask for time off via an app on your phone. So there's several incremental things that the branch-wide we're focused on getting from that good to great status.
Very good. That's good stuff. So you then are making a lot of decisions around change in your organization, and as these ideas and techniques and technologies come about, how do you communicate your key decisions within your branch?
So being former military, I'm a big believer in following the chain of command, and that's my predominant method for communicating change. I believe it involves everybody throughout the organization once it gets down to the smallest level, and make sure that the message touches each point from the senior all the way to the I won't call it the junior, but the front line, the lowest level in the organization. And so that's my primary method personally. To complement that, I really empower my department heads to amplify the message, whether that be both internal to the branch or with the nature of our branch, a lot of the things we do impact the rest of the organization, to amplify the message throughout the organization. So those are kind of my two key methods.
Do you have any specific challenges with communication?
Yes. Constantly fighting what I'll call the coconut telegraph game by using the chain of command. Communication requires a sender and a receiver. And I can't count how many times I've seen that get mixed between the sender and the receiver. And then this receiver becomes the sender, sends it to a different receiver. And, I may have said the sky is blue. By the time it gets to the fifth person, I said, Erik said the sky is green. What's wrong with that guy? That's a weird example, but it happens a lot.
How do you counter that most of the time?
Consistent, repetitive, over and often, right? Second part of that is I don't solely communicate through my department heads. I get out and about and walk around and talk to a lot of people in the branch. And so while it may take a little bit to get to know me, and I may seem like I'm not approachable at the very beginning, I think folks that do know me realize I'm okay to talk to. And I will routinely engage in questions, off-the-cuff questions, to help clarify and always be available when, hey, I heard you said the sky is green. What were you thinking? And I'll stop and say, no. I didn't say the sky is green. I said the sky is blue. I don't know how it got to you with that. But that just in time, on the spot, reinforcement of the message.
So that's management by wandering around. That's
Absolutely.
Very, very effective.
Absolutely. I rarely, particularly in our building, I rarely pick up the phone and call somebody in the building. I'll get up and walk to their desk and usually bounce into 3 or 4 people along the way and get a lot of things done.
That's great. That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your customers. So most of your customers are internal. You do have some external based on the functions that you have. Tell us a little bit about how you stay in touch with the needs of your customers. So how do you listen to them to understand what their needs are and to ensure that the services you're providing are in fact meeting those needs?
Got it. Several different methods. The biggest one, I won't say the biggest one. The biggest effort one is we do an annual survey of internal services departments that go out and ask how are they performing the entire organization, and we put a lot of emphasis on that, get the results, analyze it with all the department heads, and then I work with the department heads and challenge them to pick at least one area that's maybe not the best performing in terms of feedback received to focus on for the upcoming calendar year to improve that. So that's part of that continuous improvement initiative. And I'll tell you, every one of the department heads in the branch take their feedback of that internal services survey very seriously, and they really analyze it. Another method we use is most departments have what I'll call transactional surveys. So when you take your vehicle into fleet, you may get a hanger in the rear view mirror that asks you to fill out comment on was my vehicle service timely, did I have any problems, was it clean when I got it back, things like that. So that's a real-time transaction survey to provide that instant throughout the year feedback to not only fleet, but I know IT has it, facilities has it, several departments have those transactional-based surveys. And finally, a lot of the department heads will have periodic meetings with their direct customer groups, peer-to-peer meetings to solicit feedback and listen to the customer. I personally, on a monthly basis, go meet with my peers, each of the assistant county administrators, and it can be as short as 5 minutes. It can be as long as an hour and a half, but it's really, hey, what are you hearing from your branch that's working well in internal services, and what's not so well that we need to do some real-time adjustments on so that we don't let issues get out of control.
So Erik, it sounds like you have quite a few different mechanisms to listen to your customers and get that feedback. How do you manage that feedback so that what you're hearing you can take action on?
Okay. So as you might imagine, it becomes quite extensive, and with 9 different departments, it can be a lot. I've used this system for many years. I'll kind of pull it out. It all fits on one page to where, I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but the gray bars on the page in between each represent a department, and then the text are things I either need to talk with them and work with the departments on, or we have talked about in the past, and they're in some form of completion, because not everything happens right away, right? And then the blue text, there are things that have happened since I've printed the sheet. Every month to 2 months, the blue text starts to fill up the sheet, and I put it into the computer and then use it, and it's two-sided, both sides. The top section are things that I have to do, and then the rest of the page are things that I'm working with departments on, so that they need to do. And so it's probably not the most perfect system in the world. I know it's paper-based, so for all the younger generations out there, it's not app-based or on necessarily the most mobile thing, but it works for me.
But it works,
and it's worked for a while.
That's what's important.
With the varying forms of feedback that we get, I neglected to say earlier that when I meet with my peers, one of the things I also do is make sure I understand the other assistant county administrators' top strategic priorities for their branches. And then I, in turn, take that back and work with my team to make sure the team understands some of the top strategic priorities. I'll give an example. Early on, Chief Casson talked about the Purvis alerting system as one of his focus areas to implement in that particular year. Now it's done. We finished it 3 months early, but it touched several different departments in our branch, IT, the 911 system, and facilities had a hand in making sure the cabinets were right in the different fire stations and making sure the system worked. But through those methods of communication, we stay in touch with our customers to incorporate what's important to them to then help steer the teams to the right direction to focus on what's important to the customers.
Very good. It's a great system. Great system. Something to duplicate. I like it. Very good. So since we're talking about performance, How do you set the expectations within your group in regard to performance?
Primarily through service level agreements. That those are reviewed on a periodic basis, annually to biannually. And so that's a dialogue basis with not only the department and their internal staff, but with me on terms of what should be the right service level delivered to each of the customers. And now there's an outside piece of that too, is what is the board going to resource us to perform? And so those two things kind of go hand in hand and become a little bit of a balancing act. But I'd say that service level agreements are the primary mechanism, complemented by annual goal setting with each department head. I sit down, we talk, we work through what goals are they going to achieve throughout the year. Some are sustaining goals, like facilities has response times for their work orders. Those are year after year goals, and some are shorter in duration. They're things to help improve their business, like I know not recently, but in the last couple of years, implementing a mobile work order system to where technicians are able to receive work orders on an iPad or their phone as opposed to paper-based and going back and forth to the office all the time. And so that was at one point a goal for that department that got executed throughout the year, and now coming back to continuous improvement. That's kind of inside baseball for that department, but it still has an impact on the rest of the organization. I guess the final area where I communicate expectations for performance is, I mentioned earlier, we're kind of walking around and being engaged. In the military, I call it intrusive leadership. I meet at least bi-weekly with every department head and we go soup to nuts for everything that's going on in their department, from people, projects, things that are upcoming, where they need my help. And we have very interactive dialogue. And a lot of times they turn into micro-coaching sessions or mentoring sessions. But through those interactions, I'd be surprised if you asked any one of my department heads where they stood in terms of what my expectations were for them. And they wouldn't be able to answer it. That would shock me.
Very good. That's excellent. So talk about how that translates then into developing your business plans that align to the strategic plan.
Oh, they go hand in hand with each other. A lot of times what's an annual department goal either shows up or is they show up and they're in the business plan, all right? And so as part of the review process of the business plan, we ensure it's aligned as they develop it. Getting ready to start that again this fall for the next cycle, making sure that they're aligned with strategic goals for the county, but then are they also aligned with advancing the business and the SLAs for the department? So it's kind of both looking at both ends of the equation, if you will. And so that business plan then becomes a living document. I use it with each department head as their quarterly reviews, because they're in effect telling me their annual plan for the year, which I give more weight to than an evaluation. We sit down and go through, and we're getting ready to come up, after the end of this first quarter. Okay, you said you're going to do this list of work in FY21, where you just finished the first quarter. How are you tracking on item number 1 in your business plan, item 2, item 3? Are there outside factors beyond your control that we need to move something and plan for FY22? Or, all of those dialogues, very interactive, and it helps keep the focus on achieving the strategic plan.
How do you determine your measures around that work? So you say you're looking at this, you're reviewing it on a regular basis. Do you have in-process measures you look at? Are there outcome measures? What type of measures are applied to this work that allow you to know if the needle is being moved in the right direction?
Well, specific to the business plan, there's some that are very quantifiable and some that are not. And so those quantifiable ones, when we sit down and do the quarterly reviews, we talk about or evaluate. Yes, if a department said, I'm going to implement, I'll go back to the mobile work order system. I'm going to implement the mobile work order system. Well, that translates into a micro project plan. First, you got to identify the software, buy the hardware, train the people how to use it, and then report back on the frequency of its use and then how it's going. So each one of those becomes a milestone. And so as you go to measuring, we measure where they are, where the department is relative to the individual milestone. I don't know if I'm making a ton of sense, but
Sure.
it really goes towards each individual action item that shows up in the business plan. All of that is separate and distinct from the annual measurements or the ongoing measurements for each department. I mentioned earlier work order completion times for facilities. That I know the department looks at that every month, or if weekly, by month and weekly by location. I sit down with the department head and we also review it, and then where trends are not going in the right direction, discuss strategies and things that may need to be done to reverse negative trends.
Okay. So. Very good. I like that. We really have been changing a lot over the last 5 to 8 years, and some of the change has been welcome, some of it's been difficult. Talk to us a little bit about how you manage change within your branch.
That's a difficult area, particularly I'd say for internal services. Because any change a department in internal services make has a high propensity to have major ripple effects throughout the organization. Mm-hmm. Right? If HR changes how the hiring process goes, and they think they're doing it just internal, we have to be very careful of, is it just an internal process only? How does it get routed in the HR office? Or is it, even the simple thing of moving a box on a form for the recruitment action and maybe even retitling it to something that makes more sense to HR may not make sense to libraries, right? And so then that cascades and has ripple effects as well. So it comes down to communication, really, in my mind. Broadcast frequently and often when we're going to do a change. The biggest one that we just did in the branch, which was a major change in effect on the organization, was the agenda automation software, right? How often have you heard about Civic Clerk and communicating the change? And then even when we implement it, there's still communication that needs to go because, as I said before, sender and receiver, we can be sending on 1,000 different signals in different mediums. It only takes one not to receive it to have a problem with change. I mean, to me, that was a major change in the organization. I think by and large we did very well, but that movie's not quite finished yet because there's still tweaks I know that are ongoing to the system to make its customer experience from the user perspective. Talking about continuous feedback, we're tweaking how things show up in Civic Clerk. Just how we preview the agenda is about to change in Civic Clerk. Just all focused on enhancing the customer experience with that particular product. So I could probably, if I sat here long enough, I could come up with a whole bunch more. Right. But it is a challenging subject when you manage change. How do you manage change? And something we focus a lot on, particularly with the bigger items like that. I talked earlier today about two-factor authentication getting ready to roll out with how we access the network. That's another significant change, maybe, right? And so it happens all the time.
And for that example specifically, it causes people to do something more than they were doing before.
Right.
So if that's the case, how do you gain buy-in for those kind of changes?
Well, specifically to that example, but this is applicable to all of them. Part of your message with the change is the why. It's got to be there. This specific one is we could be really put in the hurt locker if somebody nefarious accesses our network. Uh-huh. And so the whole why behind two-factor authentication is to prevent that and maintain our business operations and be able to deliver services to the citizens of the county, which is, hello, why we're all here, right?
Right.
So while it may be painful or an extra step that somebody has to take, I've found that if you do a good job at articulating the why, most times people are are understanding and accommodating, right?
Exactly right.
So yeah.
Along the same lines, one of the areas of change is we have been looking at how we create more systematic processes across the organization to create that consistency around what it is that we agree we need to be doing the same way. Our leadership system is a result of that and an example of that, to where these are processes and or procedures or whatever it might happen to be, actions and activities that we have agreed as leaders we want to do the same across the organization. For some folks, it represents changing the way they've always done things, and sometimes that becomes personal. So have you had any experience with that in your team? And if so, how have you worked through that?
I have. This is a little bit of an older example, but when we implemented Munis in our timekeeping system, the timekeeper for my department at the time swore up and down that they could not live without the paper timesheets, and that it would not work being able to do time on the computer. And part of it's how you interpersonal relationships and how you interact with people.
Right.
And I
right.
Instead of taking the approach of I don't care what you think, you're going to do it, and the ramifications, too bad. Mm-hmm. I approached it from a perspective of I understand you think this won't work. Trust me, give it a shot. I will go out on a limb and tell you in 2 months you'll tell me the new way is so much easier than the way you've done it in the past. But you don't have to believe me right now. That's okay. But trust me, give it a shot. I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm asking you to take a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And we'll see how it goes. Yeah, and that's how the story came out, and 2 or 3 months down the road. So some of it's a method of approach. Mm-hmm. But I also find it ties back to the communicating the why, because a lot of that's driven out of fear and threat, right?
Yes.
And so so many things are tied to method of approach.
Mm-hmm. And it all comes down to your people.
Yep.
There are a million stories where folks, to your point, were told to change something, a location, mm-hmm. a job description, a title, whatever, but were not part of the solution themselves.
Right.
And when you make them part of the solution, they buy into that solution because they're part of it.
Right.
And that's what wins.
Right. Speaking of timekeeping, taking it a step further, I even had a department head tell me, we can't do electronic time off. Will not work in our department. That was the starting position. Well, in that instance, I've seen it work in other organizations. The whole Department of Defense does it that way. And I said, well, not nameless department head here. Trust me, it'll work. If the Department of Defense can figure it out for their big organization, we can figure it out here too. Mm-hmm. And the department's on electronic time off right now.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. So sometimes it just takes time to work people through things. Very good. That's excellent. The culture of the county over time has changed. I know when I first got here, we were not focused on our team members, our employees. Mm-hmm. We were not focused on our customers. Mm-hmm. It was decisions made at the top, no input from the folks below that level, and it showed because we were an organization focused on compliance rather than on serving. Mm-hmm. And so we've changed that, and it's wonderful to see that across the organization. Talk a little bit about how you, as the leader of that branch, actually your personal actions reflect that culture so that others see it as an example.
I touched on it a little bit earlier, but not just the management by walking around, but my personal actions. I do a lot of listening. I've had some folks say, he listens and he keeps a stoic face, and I can't tell what he's thinking. And I'm almost viewing that as a threat. But really, I'm listening and I'm processing. Sometimes it's, okay, do I need to add something to this sheet? Sometimes it's making sure I understand the scenario, because I'm not necessarily the smartest guy in the world. But I come back to listening. Listen to the voice of your people. And there are many mechanisms in which you can do that. But listen not just listen with respect, right? I may disagree with what's being said to me, and I may state that I disagree, but getting back to method of approach, how I tell that individual I disagree is really important. And you talk about personal actions, I put a lot of emphasis and value on that. It ties into, respect is not by accident one of our core values, right?
Right.
And so I find myself doing a lot of listening. I'm not necessarily the most extroverted person. You won't find me at the life of the party talking a lot, but I'm observant, and by listening and observing, I use that to create not only just my personal plan of attack and where I can make a difference in the organization. It allows people who, in that old mindset, who come to work and be told what to do all the time. Well, now that communication goes a second way up the chain of command. And I'll use the example of Robbie Middleton when I first got here. Within the first couple of months, I need a truck to do my work that has toolboxes on the side. Okay. It took me about 1.5 to 2 years, but today he drives a truck with toolboxes on the side. It was super important to him. Yeah. I listened, and you don't necessarily have it as an action overnight, or an action that can be done overnight, but don't lose sight of it, and follow through.
So I will tell you, Eric, my personal observation too is that you don't only listen, you also ask the right questions to clarify things and make sure you understand. Right. And from a leadership perspective, that's huge. That's huge, because then you are making good decisions around clearly understanding what is going on.
I do that because it's part of that. I've said it 2 times now, but it's that sender and receiver. In that instance, I know I'm the receiver, and if I'm not hearing the right message, it spirals out of control or goes off in a different direction. Yeah.
That's awesome. So really, one other question I have is around our evaluation. Ultimately, is how we're serving our citizens, and for a lot of us, what we see in the citizen survey gives us an indication of how what we're doing. For you in your specific position, how do you know when you're doing a good job? How do you evaluate your own performance?
That's pretty tough, and I'm highly critical of myself, so that makes it even tougher. I find reward, if you will, when I see people in the organization able to make a difference. And so when I'm seeing, whether it's somebody in fleet or in ERP or purchasing, making a difference to either somebody else in the organization or a citizen, I take comfort, or you say, how do I evaluate my performance? If the members of the team are making a difference in the community or with our customers, that's how I measure my personal performance. I view my role as ultimately as a leader to, the old Navy phrase is man, train, and equip. I use remove roadblocks out of the way for the people that work in the organization to be able to make that difference. And so if there are roadblocks in the way, now sometimes it may be painful for team members, but that's where the listening mechanism comes in, is to hear where the pain points are, to then you can see it all kind of ties back together to be able to enable people to make a difference. And so it's not a widget measurement. It's hard to really do that measurement, but it comes down to seeing the team execute why they're here, and that's to make a difference.
It's leadership.
Yeah.
I like it. I'll ask you a couple of things that are off script.
Okay.
One is, what do you consider your biggest challenge right now within your branch?
This is probably going to be boring for the audience, but we have some accounting stuff with our financial system that's really back of the house. Back of the house work that most elements of the organization won't see, but if we don't get our accounting system streamlined and more, I guess, more accurate, it has the propensity to ripple effect throughout the organization because it touches money, which makes everything go around. So is that the biggest challenge? That's in one area.
Right.
If I were here long enough, I could come up with a big challenge in every area.
Sure.
These facilities is going through a major construction program right now. So that's keeping track of that. It's hundreds of millions of dollars between the fire rescue bonds, the library's bonds, the jail expansion. There's a lot of work to be done there, and so that's a big challenging area. I didn't list it as first because that's kind of my bread and butter. So I'm probably overly confident that we're going to knock it out of the park, and I'm there to throw them a lifeline if there's a problem. Right? Yeah. I feel like it's a little more in control.
Right.
But there are a lot of big things going on in and around the branch.
So we'll wrap up with this one. What are you most excited about in your branch right now? Or the organization overall? You can take that any direction you like.
I'm most excited about the new ideas I hear from each of the departments in and around the organization. I've seen a complete 180 from the mindset of never challenge the status quo to today. Folks who talk to me frequently will hear me say the phrase "the bright idea fairy," and how I want to kill the bright idea fairy because usually means more work. I sometimes mean that, but a lot of times I don't, because if the ideas are coming up, it results in improving the overall organization. So I'm most excited by the what I see in the people in the organization, not feeling feeling the ability that it's okay to come up with ideas and challenge the why have we always done it this way. Can we do it a different way? Sometimes the answer is no, because there's statute reasons or we have to, but a lot of times the answer is, I don't know. I still get asked questions. Why do we have to do X process this way? I don't know. Let's figure it out. And instead of met with, that's just how we've always done it.
Which we're not allowed to say anymore in this organization. Those words have been outlawed.
I say it. So that's how we've always done it, but I don't know why that is. Let's go look at it and see if there's a better way to do it.
Right.
So
perfect. Good. Erik, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem.
We'd love to hear your comments and suggestions about what you heard today. You can send them directly to me. My email address is right here on the screen. And before I forget, past and future episodes of Inside Pasco are available on demand on Team Pasco and on the county's YouTube channel. Thank you for being part of the solution, and thanks for watching.